remember last time I was looking at the betting markets, and there'd been a jump in the probability of Clinton being the next president. So she was at about 63% maybe, but it jumped to pretty much 70. What I looked at then was how much money had been bet at different levels, which you can see on Betfair. Though I'd forgotten that you need to be logged on. So I have an account and I'm logged on, so I get to see all this as well. You can see this part of the plot without having an account, but not this. It doesn't have to be a large account, like I have a couple of euro, because that lets me see this information, and it also lets me bet. So what I noticed was that a lot more money had been bet at these levels. So from 1.44 to 1.46, over $1 million had been bet. Well, typically there was a 500,000. And I interpreted that as being a support resistance level, because this was where you had more than normal levels of betting. That you had one group, the bulls and the bears in effect, one group kind of going, oh, this is a time to buy, and another group who felt it was a time to sell. And as a result, I thought, okay, it's going to go up, but it's going to find it difficult to go through this barrier. And again, it's experimental. I had to see what would happen. And so now we've had a couple of days and it has held. So I'll jot that down as something to pay attention to from now on. That since you can put in orders above and below at whatever level you want. So basically my thinking would be, if the price breaks above the 70% level, so the odds fall below, I suppose, 1.44, if that's 1.44 to 1.46 being the barrier range, then that support or resistance will have been broken. The reason I'm saying that is because then I'd have to reconsider. I'd have to go, am I happy to be holding on to my bet that Trump is going to win? Because I thought, okay, if I got in at about 80%, that's when the market, when people were just euphoric on the Democrat side or panicked on the Republican, that the election is over. There's no point. And that's the time you want to bet on Clinton, when the odds are very much in your favor, where everyone in the room thinks this election is over, there's no chance, there is no contest. So that's more from a trading perspective, because again, this is the Quant channel, so it's about this kind of thing. This would be more an experimental research side of things, where I'm trying to look at a market which rules don't really exist. I mean, what is the quantitative method for me to estimate what's going to happen? I could write down dozens, if not hundreds or thousands, that everyone has their own rule. everyone has their strong opinion, but then if you ask them, well, what's that based on? Can you quantify it? What data can I get? Because that is the way of the quant. Now I suppose it's rebranded as data science, data analyst, whatever you want. Basically, though, I suppose it is just statistics. I mean, that would be the before quant name. I mean, trying to extract information or derive conclusions from data. So where was I? So this is still holding. It hasn't broken through and made me have to reconsider. So the betting market still have Clinton as favourite, but the move hasn't broken through. So there hasn't been follow through. I thought it would be very easy for it to move from 60 to 70%, since there wasn't any resistance, significant level of note. So basically going from 60 to 70% doesn't particularly mean anything. Now, if it's able to break through 70, that'll trigger kind of alarm bells in my head. The main thing you're always looking for is, what is the trend? Has it broken to a new high? Has it broken to a new low? That's a significant event. That's something that you kind of go, ooh, something has happened. While this move is just noise. So that's the betting markets. You know the routine. We look at the polls, because one way of looking at what's going on is the betting markets, and the other are the polls. And they both think that they're right, and the other guys, they don't really get it, you know. Because the betting markets is a strange thing. I can see the price, but each bettor has a totally different routine, methodology. The pollsters have a well-developed process. You know, they would kind of go, okay, we're going to poll all these people. We have to make sure that they are representative, so we're not just asking many people from a small group, because that group is not typical. That group's behavior is not the same as how the whole state or country votes, thinks, feels. So the polls, well, we actually have a Clinton in the lead in most of them from the 28th. Yesterday, Trump was in the lead. Typically, the polls will have an error of maybe plus or minus 3. So that's because, you know, if you think of, say there are like 10 million people in your state or whatever region of interest, you're not going to ask all 10 million people. You only try and do that in the election. And even there, maybe 50-60% of people will actually vote. And a significant number will actually be too young to vote. So, you know, but if you randomly pick 1,000 people from that 10 million, you'll get you should get a reasonable estimate of what the average of the whole group think. And I mentioned already, I mean, the potential biases are that you just ask 1,000 people who live in your village, but that's not a sample of the entire region who are voting. So like maybe they all work in a car factory. they might all be men, they might all be women, they might all be aged 30 to 40. So you want to be aware of whether the people you're sampling are well distributed. So there's not an over-representation of a particular group, because then your 1,000 isn't reflecting what the area that you're actually interested in feels. So if you only pick 1,000 people from 10 million, which 1,000 did you pick? And that's where the plus or minus 3% comes, because if 10 people picked a random sample of 1,000 people, they're going to be a different 1,000 people. And so you're going to get a noise, a randomness, just from the fact that each poll is picking a different 1,000. And these are all pretty much within 3%. So I mean that's a small, slightly above. But there, we'd be looking at the trend, where essentially these gaps used to be plus 10, plus 15 or something. I mean, that there was a big gap. So there, the more interesting thing to be commenting on is the trend. The fact that this gap has just been falling and falling and falling. So there, the projection would be, well, actually, it looks like by the time we actually have the election, this gap is going to be within error. So within that plus or minus 3%. So, we could have Trump is 4 ahead, or Trump is 3 ahead. But if they did the sample many times, or that they could end up with Clinton 1 ahead, because they'll pick a different 1,000 people. Otherwise, we can look at the stock market, because remember how the stock market changed in the 3 months up to the election is a very good indicator of who wins. And we're still below, I think it was 81.6. I'll refresh the exact number as we get closer to the election, but that is definitely below the key, what the value of the S&P was 3 months before the election. So the trend is kind of up the last couple of days, or actually this one day, but it's still below the key level. The problem is that we'd like to be able to magically know how the election's going to go. And on the other hand, there are certain things that we can measure. And this often happens, where there's something that we'd like to know, but that's not necessarily what we can know. So, and that's what we've been struggling with in this series of videos. How do I bet on the elections? And the two leading approaches, well, there's the betting markets and the polls. But just as an example, I just came across this morning of this kind of thing, where the mismatch is. Why is it a difficult problem? Football. So today there's a football match on, or soccer, since this is a US presidential election series, so soccer would be the appropriate name in America. Now, Fiorentina are playing FK Karabakh. We'll zoom this down a bit. Okay. So here's the thing. The odds are 1.62. That makes no sense. And I'll just tell you why. Fiorentina are a top side in the Italian league. And the Italian league is one of the top leagues. So Fiorentina is a very good side. One of the probably top 20 teams in the world, or in Europe anyway. FK Karabakh, I think, is from Azerbaijan. Not a single player from FK Karabakh would have any hope of getting into the Fiorentina side. I mean, the Fiorentina side have real quality throughout, and even on their subs bench. So, with any bottom-down model, if I was trying to estimate what's the probability, and Fiorentina are playing at home, and home teams typically have an advantage, they win more often. So, typically, based on what these teams are, the odds would be 1.1, maybe 1.2, because there is randomness. You could end up with Fiorentina could get a player sent off early, so then they'd be down to 10 men. Then what? That would make it fairer. There could be an incorrect refereeing decision, so the other team gets a penalty when they shouldn't have, but that gives them a free goal. Those kind of things. So there is an inherent randomness, particularly in soccer, where there are regular wrong refereeing decisions. They're working on it. I mean, it is better now than it was before, but compared to most sports, it's a bit vague. So where was I? So this is not obviously the presidential election, but from the Quant perspective, it's how can I? Is there a method? Is there a way that I can figure out what that number should be? Now, I said Fiorentina are a way better side, and I said that any reasonable method, you'd come up with 1.1, 1.2. So to get 1.6, you're being paid way more than fair value. So that would suggest I should bet confidently on Fiorentina. And you see, that's what this guy recommended. He says, with home advantage, look, a decent price for the second group stage, blah, 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 blah. And this person has been typically making money. So, look, every month he's made money. So this is a good tipper. But this guy has also typically been making money. And this is the issue. This is the question. It's quite well known as Italian teams treat those. It's quite well known as Italian teams treat those European Cups. Does that make sense? It's quite well known how Italian teams treat those cups, probably, yeah. They are not focused on them. So that is the thing. That is the question. I mean, for all those Doctor Who fans out there, I really, really liked the fact that that's one of his lines, you know, that when he is confronted with a problem, he's primarily, initially, trying to come up with what is the question. So he'd always be kind of going, blah, 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 and then he'd go, no, that's not the right question. And so looking at Fiorentina, looking at their team, their history, they should thrash FK Karabag. But Italian teams are not interested in this tournament. It's not the most prestigious one, and you end up playing 2 games a week instead of 1. You end up doing worse in your league because your players are exhausted, travelling all around the place, playing a game midweek. So, and we've already seen in the first round, I think Inter Milan lost. Inter Milan, who are a stronger side at the moment, they were at home against an equally poor side, and they lost. So the question in this case is, are Fiorentina interested in this game? Strategically, is it more important for them to rest their players and focus on the league, which is their main goal? Then they would prefer to lose. They would prefer not to win. They would prefer to get knocked out of this competition as quickly as they can. And historically, that is what the Italian clubs have been doing in this tournament for many, many years. So I just wanted to look at this as an example of that's not the right question. You could do all kinds of analysis, and it would all tell you that, Fiorentina against FK Karabag, Fiorentina will win. These are crazy odds. They should be 1.1. But that's because you're not asking the right question. Likewise, when we're looking at this presidential election, I can look at historical studies and go, I can look at the polls, I can look at the betting markets, I can see the 2 important indicators are how well the economy's been doing, like with the GDP, and what the approval rate is of the current president. As a matter of interest, both back Trump. The president's approval rating is low. The economy's growth is low. And we looked at that in a couple of videos ago. You know, a key indicator suggests Trump is going to win. But is that the right question? So just to wrap up, the markets are still holding, and that matches with the theory I had last video, about the support and resistance, that that Clinton would find it hard to improve her odds because she was just going to run into a band where a lot of money had been bet, which I felt might be a resistance, and that does look like being the case. We looked at the polls. Essentially, they are neck and neck. They are within error. And we looked at the stock market, which are still below the key level, which would also suggest that Trump will win. And finally, I just had a quick look at the football betting market, where basically, well, just more as an example of the meta question, I suppose. Are we asking the right question?